Today, we're talking about Platinum card breaks once again because they are being sued by Blowout Cards for unpaid inventory of upwards of $1 million USD. This one is an interesting story because I think it ties to some of the things I've spoken about in the last few months about the house of cards that might exist within this industry and sort of what it means when you're going to have businesses like what we're about to talk to have really high debt that they can't pay back. What does it mean in terms of the impact they're going to have on the wider industry? Do we have too much artificial liquidity in this space? What does it actually mean? So that's what I'm going to talk to in this one, share the thoughts on this story in particular, but then tie it into some of our other talking points from the last few months. Now, this story was brought to my attention through Paul Lesko, as always, when it comes to hobby lawsuits on Twitter. Now, a few other people have talked about this since then, Neo Cards and Comics, AIH Sports, maybe one or two others. I've not watched their videos. I was away for the weekend at a fishing tournament, so I'm sort of playing catch up with all this hobby news, but I wanted to come in, as always, like I've said, blind. I've not watched their stuff. I want to come in and share my own unbiased opinions. Now, what Paul basically talks to with this lawsuit is the fact that, Frontline Collectibles / Blowout Cards is suing Platinum card breaks, and it's essentially for unpaid inventory, like I said in the start. Now, very quickly, Platinum card breaks will ring a bell. This is the company that Sports Card Radio covered quite a lot over the last few years. I talked about them as well. The company that held up a box cutter to their employee's throat, the company that had a bit of a sleight of hand where it looked like they stole a pretty big one-of-one, if I remember correctly. And I think the same company that ripped up somebody's one-of-one hit in a product because they didn't like the player or didn't like the player's belief. They're a company that's had a lot of accusations towards them for a long period of time. They're a breaker that's been around for a long period of time. So this won't be surprising for many to sort of hear this news, but one of those ones that need to be kept front of mind when you're hearing about this story and sort of making up your own view of the situation. Now, what Paul goes on to mention is the fact that these parties, Blowout Cards and Platinum card breaks, had engaged in a series of transactions over a number of years. And what happened between October 2023 and February 2024 was that basically Platinum card breaks stopped paying their bills. And this was despite the fact that Blowout would provide delivery of the goods and Platinum card breaks would accept them. Payment was just not made. And you can sort of see over here, it's for $945,000 USD, which is not a small amount of money. Yes, I know product is quite expensive these days, but I would have thought maybe Blowout Cards would have pushed back a little bit sooner rather than let it get to almost $1 million. But again, at the same time, product is very expensive these days, and they've obviously been dealing for quite a long time. They didn't expect, bills to go unpaid. And what sort of happens in business when you have long-standing business? Your payment terms typically stretch out a little bit because you've dealt with that person for a long time. You cut them the benefit of the doubt. There's a lot of goodwill built up there, and that's obviously come back to bite Blowout in the backside, but an interesting one. Now, they basically want their money back plus 6% interest plus whatever the courts determine is, fair for like pain and suffering, for the relief of the situation. Now, this story in and of itself is obviously pretty interesting. We need to sort of see what comes next from this and whether or not we hear any updates this year. I think this lawsuit was filed in October 2024, so there's obviously still a bit of time, but one of those ones that I'll keep a close eye on and give you guys an update. But 945 grand is not a small amount of money. And then the question becomes and goes to my other talking points: what does this actually mean for them as a business? Are they going to be able to pay this back? Like, does Blowout Cards have to write that debt off? Are Platinum card breaks going to be able to afford to pay it back? And if they can pay it back, what does it mean for them as a business? What does Platinum card breaks currently have on hand that they need to sell that would then pay for this debt? Does that mean they have customers' cards on hand that might get taken as part of this? Like, what does that actually mean long term? And does it mean they have to close down their doors? And if they do in fact have to close down their doors, what's the trickle-on effect from that? Like, what's the trickle-on effect for the customers and the repackers off the back of this that are relying on that business to be there? And they're, like I said, a breaker that's been around for a fair bit of time. They're not a blow-in from what I recall that sort of only came in during the pandemic. I think they were here for quite a few years before that. So, for them to sort of disappear because of something like this is a pretty big deal. And that sort of makes me ask the question, well, how many other breakers are in a very similar situation? Because you need to think, if Platinum card breaks have to go ahead and pay this back, right, this $1 million, where are they going to get that money from? Clearly, they're struggling for cash because that would assume, or you would assume that they're not paying bills elsewhere too. It's not just Blowout Cards. So if that is the case, like, where's the money going to come from? And if they can pay it back, what does that mean for their profit margins? They're going to have to run at a loss for a very long time to pay for this, right? And for that to happen is like, surely that's not sustainable. How can you go ahead and buy product for the prices that they're currently selling for if you're not keeping anything for yourself, right? If you're not paying, your overheads, your your rent space, your electricity bills, your utilities, everything else, right? It's just a bit of a slippery slope that I think could have some kind of domino effect down the line. Now, what's also pretty interesting with this, as was flagged by Sports Card Radio via their Sports Card News Twitter handle, is that the same, breaker, i.e. Platinum Card Break, started a new breaking company the same week in which they were sued, which is obviously a pretty interesting situation. Normally when you see people do stuff like this, it means they're basically going to go bankrupt, meaning that Blowout Cards is going to be shit out of luck when it comes to trying to recoup that money. But there are some things, at least here in Australia, so I'm not sure what it's like in the US, but here in Australia, there are things in place to stop people from doing that and getting away with it. I.e., just because you make a new company does not mean you can hide from your past. But it's one of those ones that we sort of need to see what happens next, but I thought that, was pretty interesting. This whole situation just, reminds me of what happened with Mark's Cards, right? Where they sort of incurred a big debt by, taking people's money for consignments for PSA grading and then going ahead and shipping them to PSA, but then not paying the PSA bill because they'd already spent that money elsewhere. It's like you're playing catch up all the time. So this just reeks to me of a business playing catch up. So we don't have all the facts. Obviously, we need to sort of see what happens next. But like I said in the very start of this case, like Platinum Card Breaks, they do have a history. It's not a good one, based on what people have said about them. So I sort of don't know what to expect from this, but, common sense is telling me they're probably going to disappear and that money's basically gone for Blowout Cards. So let's sort of see what happens next. But I just thought this one was pretty interesting. And like I said, like how many other businesses are out there in the same shoes as Platinum Card Breaks? Obviously the margins that people relied on during the pandemic and during the boom are sort of gone now. It's really hard to sort of rip people off hand over fist like you were in the past. And many breakers did it. It's why you saw so many people come and go when it came to sports card selling and flipping and all that kind of thing, because the money's not really there anymore. It's a hard sell these days. Like obviously you can still make good money, but you need to put your effort in. It was effortless previously. Now you got to actually work your ass off to try and make things happen. So how many other breakers are out there exactly like this? I'm guessing there's a lot, and I could be, wrong in saying that, but that's just my sentiment based on what I'm saying. And yes, I know social media is just a very narrow view, as I've said in the past, but when you go to shows, when you watch people online, when you watch these vlogs and all that sort of thing, and you're hearing people talk that are breakers, you're sort of hearing things that are a little bit more challenging these days. And if you've got companies that are sort of going to collapse because they can't pay their bills, what's that trickle-on effect? What does that mean for Blowout Cards? Because they've got their own bills to pay. And what does it mean for manufacturers? Because if you've got all these breakers, buying product that they can't pay for, are they going to overproduce things and produce product that nobody's going to buy? Like, that's the other stuff that, concerns me a little bit and goes to the things I've talked about in my more recent videos, talking about, the artificial liquidity that exists within this industry. You've got so many people buying stuff with the fact they can rely on the fact that they can go to a card show and sell things because repackers are going to be there, breakers are going to be there, people are going to be there to buy them. The trickle-on effect, the dominoes are that if product, if companies go bankrupt because they can't afford to pay for their inventory, and that means these companies then can't sell inventory to people, what does that mean? I think it means that we definitely have way too much stuff going on in this space for the amount of people that are actually here, that are actually happy to pay the money. Now, I'm not saying the hobby's bad or anything like that, but I'm just saying watch this space because I think things could get a lot worse than what people think. And I think the economy is actually going to see a bit of an uptick, to be honest, now that Trump's elected. But that's for another day, that conversation. But yeah, just my random thoughts on this one story in particular. So I'm really keen to hear what you guys have to say down below. But that's sort of it for today. As always, share your thoughts and let me know what you think, and we'll sort of go from there. I'll see you guys in the next one.